Doctor, welcome.
Thank you, Your Lordship.
Your voyage was fair?
As a fish hag.
I believe you know all the members of the council.
Gentlemen. I do wish the circumstances...
We've read your report. Grim stuff.
Well, I believe there's no way around that, Sir Francis. The report is the most thorough picture I can present based on the fact that I am dealing with testimony as opposed to my own observation of what transpired.
The issue here is Eskimo tales of Englishmen eating Englishmen. A number of us here have spent years in the ice on dwindling supplies, and yet the very thought...
Well, I could only assume that the thought arrives far along the way, at the stage of final desperation.
Since the beginning of Arctic exploration, European navigators dreamed of a passage west to the riches of the Orient. The British Navy had searched for 300 years, and by the 19th century, the fabled Northwest Passage had become an international obsession, like the moon landing in our time. By 1845, the British Admiralty sent out 2 state-of-the-art ships under the command of Sir John Franklin, confident he would return the Arctic hero. Sir John and his 128 men were never seen again. The Holy Grail of British exploration remained an elusive mystery. The fate of Franklin and his crew set off one of the largest and most expensive manhunts in history. After 6 years of searching, driven by an obsessive, grieving widow, Lady Jane Franklin, the British Navy, the Americans, Russians, and French failed to find any evidence of the lost voyage. In the end, it was a doctor, John Rae, a Hudson's Bay Company employee traveling over 13,000 miles on foot and in small craft, who unlocked the mystery of the fate of Franklin and the elusive final link in the Northwest Passage. But John Rae did not come back a hero. Every one of the British naval commanders who had failed received a knighthood. Rae was abandoned to the margins of history because he returned with a story that shook the English-speaking world. This is a complex story of pride, ambition, and obsession. The search for the truth is shrouded in mystery and controversy to this day. We're planning a fiction film. That's why these actors are gathering in London. We've assembled a team of filmmakers and script advisors to investigate where the truth lies. For some in the room, the current historical record is fiction. We have a Canadian author, historians from Orkney, Scotland, Cambridge University, authorities on British naval history, and an Inuit statesman from Canada's north, whose ancestors were guides to John Rae, the central character of our story.
Would you prefer to be accosted to the world beside each other?
I would say that I prefer to be crossed.
And of course, a director.
What we'd like to do is do a read-through of the script. We haven't introduced Andrew, so I'm sorry. Andrew Burson, the writer, is here. Yeah, sorry. Lord Ovi, yes. So what we'd like to do is, what we're interested in from the documentary point of view, and there's dual purpose here. Andrew, of course, is interested in hearing his dialogue. This is a first draft. The purpose of a first draft is for the documentary. If this draft was ready to take out and shoot, we wouldn't have a documentary. It's so that the film that we're making is finding our story. So questions are. Well, try you there. We'll just see how it goes.
Our research begins in Orkney. islands inhabited for some 8,000 years. Settled by the Norse, the islands were pledged to Scotland in the 15th century by a Danish king. For centuries, Orkney was the point of departure and return for ships heading out in search of a northwest passage to the Orient. Martin Frobisher in the 16th century, Henry Hudson in the 17th, and Captain Cook in the 18th. The list goes on. It is here in 1813 that the future Arctic explorer John Rae was born, in the parish of Orford, on the large island simply named the mainland.
Show us the house.
I wanted Andrew, the scriptwriter, and Rick, who will play John Rae, to get a feel for the place.
No, yeah. I thought, more like a museum, but it's like just the old house sitting here.
Watch your step. Yeah.
You could just see like the whole sound.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And this is where he'd sail. He pulled up his boat just down here, right?
Oh yeah,
So
one the
his
other.
little new sail.
Right, yeah.
So he would have sailed all the way out in that harbour out to
Yeah.
Stromness. And that's where he'd sit every day. See
Yeah.
the ships, heading out.
Across the bay from Rae's home was the safe harbour of Stromness. Young Rae would sail for hours, chasing ships heading off to the northwest. It was a seaport that would inspire generations of young men eager for adventure. One day, Rae too would be drawn into the allure of Arctic exploration and the quest for the Northwest Passage.
It's nearly 200 years since John Rae walked these streets as a boy. But it's easy to think that not much has changed. Even the weather, which changes roughly 10 times an hour, remains the same. I can only imagine that the temper of the people hasn't changed much either. To a person, there's a gentleness, kindness, and humility to those I've met so far. Beyond that, they're steadfast, tough, and pleasantly tolerant of me. I'm immersing myself in Rae's journals and struggling to get a handle on the accent. A subtle marriage of Scots and Norse that will no doubt be a challenge to plausibly mimic down the road.
Well, he was different in that he was of the better off class. You know, his father was factor of one of Orkney's largest estates. And they lived in a large house, and they would have been looked up to as part of the upper classes of society, undoubtedly. Though he certainly would have been a bit different. It was a very sort of privileged lifestyle that they had. Certainly were a number of servants employed in the house. So upstairs, downstairs kind of carry on, you know. There's some nice
Beautiful drawing.
It's just given the impression of when John Rae and his family are coming home, maybe one late summer evening, and the lights starting to go down, and it's, you know, where the house was, and
And they would have had carriages.
yes, they would have had carriages.
And would that have been a permanent? Would that have been a servant, their servant?
Oh
or-
yes, they would have had someone to actually drive them for them. So,
Well, so here you've got
and this is
some-
the dining room here,
Got some colour in that.
giving an idea of what it would have been like with a fire on and the table
beautiful.
set for dinner, and this is the drawing room that
Oh,
they
sorry,
would
the
have
drawing room.
gone from their evening
Beside,
meal
right.
into the drawing room. So I mean, you would entertain guests here, and it was very much a room where people would play cards and the main social sort of sphere of the house. And they would have had panelling going right around the room as well.
So you've got the piano just sort of by the books here. Fire going, two nice chairs.
This is for walking,
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
and then you fling it up.
Right.
You're able, you fling it up just in one movement. You got,
But not
yeah,
like that.
So
just
you're
comfortable.
don't put your fingers on the trigger until you see something jump.
Things that he enjoyed most were going out, as he said himself, hunting and shooting. But in those days, even a relatively well-to-do family couldn't go out and fill the freezer from the local supermarket. They had to get fresh food, and the way to do it, of course, was to hunt and fish. So he was doing some. It wasn't purely a hobby for him. It was a very useful addition to the family food. But he obviously enjoyed it as much as anything else.
When something jumps, you fling the gun up, take aim, and fire. Now your gun's
No,
too.
then like this, that's bad.
That's bad.
Yeah.
You're at the ready.
Right.
Bird gets up. You fling up the gun, aim, and you're a bit low there.
This and
You
then.
still seem a bit stiff. Where's your hand?
Can you show me again?
Let's see what feels natural.
It should
No,
be.
you. I think this arm seems.
So it should be.
Well, it's what you're comfortable with. It doesn't look quite right somehow.
But this
It
could be.
almost seems. He still doesn't seem quite right here.
Then I can't get my. It's very strange. Maybe I'm physically unable to hunt.
I don't think so.
What sort of things would John Rae have hunted?
I think John Rae would have shot grouse. His journal suggests he did.
Yeah.
I suspect he also shot seals.
But he would have shot that not for food, though.
I don't think they would have eaten the seals so much as used them for oil.
What a sight, eh?
It's not bad, eh?
It's just,
I can think of worse places to spend eternity. Well, this is the Hoy Sound, and this is where all the ships coming into Stromness would pass through here. So all the whaling ships for the Davis Straits would come in here. The Hudson Bay Company ships would sail in and out from here as well. And of course the Franklin expedition left from here too. You know, they came into Stromness, picked up water, and then headed due west. So I mean, over the horizon there. Next stop, Canada.
Yeah. The search for a passage had become an international obsession, with illustrated newspaper reports to fire the public's imagination, and articles by such celebrated Victorians as Charles Dickens. The British Navy was determined more than ever to complete the task, despite the reluctance of some politicians.
Action. No disrespect intended to the gentlemen assembled, but how many more ships are we to see sink in that god-forsaken Arctic, searching for this phantom navigable passage?
No one doubts the risks inherent in these voyages. The reality remains that should we fail to achieve a passage, the Russians will, to our detriment.
Presuming such a passage exists.
A harpoon from a whaling ship working off Newfoundland gets found in a sperm whale of the same season off Alaska.
You gauge then there is a passage.
That we all do.
Otherwise, few here would have dined so long on rancid buffalo fat.
Have you a man in mind? Yes.
John Franklin.
Is that wise?
There was some question as to whether Franklin was the right man for the job. He was 59. He was slightly overweight and there was some question.
Put him on a ship, he'll be all right. Even if you're fat and if you're old, in a ship, there isn't really a great deal to do anyway, in the way of exertion. As a captain, he was excellent, that all of his people on the ships were absolutely happy with him.
I vouch all here would willingly board his ship.
Yeah. We all know John Franklin. Most of us have sailed with him. But, and I dearly hope not to misspeak myself, but I understand in the last few years, Lady Franklin has set John's compass.
You are to lead 6 schoolmen, 2 fine ships for several years.
I know my obligations.
Obligations? I'm speaking of leadership, of glorious achievement. No one is under obligation to seek immortality. It is the lucky man who is blessed with the opportunity to transcend his time. If I could command those ships, I would.
I know you would.
I'm trying to restore him, because this has got to happen.
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm trying to remind him of his...
Yes.
But you're not putting me down, which actually
No.
feeds into the sort of respect of the relationship. And I don't say, well, you're a woman. You can't do that.
No, yeah.
I just say, I know you would. Of course you would.
Many can only dream of such chances.
I'm lucky. I know.
You are.
Do you think Sir John wanted to go?
That's actually a very good question, I must say. I would certainly say that Sir John Franklin was incredibly honored to be the one that would be given this very, very well-organized expedition, which was supposed to be the last one.
If he was not married to Lady Franklin, would he have commanded the ship?
Probably not. It was said, and it is a fact, that Lady Franklin had quite a lot of work behind the scenes.
You had something to do with him going. You encouraged
I
him.
helped, I encouraged. As a good wife should, yes.
You did more than encourage him, though.
I enabled him.
And how did you go about doing that?
I gently corrected other people's misconceptions.
How could you? Have you no idea?
John! What has taken you?
You did drape this over me just now, as I slept, as I lay sleeping.
Yes?
Why would you do that?
You appeared a little chill.
So, you put the flag over me?
I lay it on you to warm you, yes. The prospect of this journey is so overwhelming. Perhaps they were right in desiring a younger man.
I am more than fit.
Today was an adventure. I climbed the cliffs that Rae would have climbed for exercise, for fun, to put himself out there, which goes some way to explaining his appetite for daunting risks later on. I wonder if he had any fear. Just continued with a gale moving in with hurricane-force winds. Of course, the director wanted me out in the full force of the storm. They had better use those shots.
After Rae qualified as a surgeon at the University of Edinburgh, he returned home to Orkney at the age of 19.
His father was the agent for the Hudson Bay Company, and John would have been familiar. I mean, he would have seen ships from the Hudson Bay come in and out of there, and he would more than likely have met people that had been to Canada, and he would have, I think he was basically just looking for adventure, and then the opportunity arose of serving on the ship, going out to the Hudson's Bay as the ship surgeon. And so his father would have encouraged him. He would have signed him up, I suppose.
A summer job, really, on board the Prince of Wales Hudson's Bay ship, leaving Stromness in June. And it was really just for a single season. He used to be doctor on board the ship.
It's the fact that you've got no idea what's over that horizon, but you know that there's a big world out there. I think that's what lured Rae. It's just he wanted a taste of it. He wanted to be part of it.
For all its wonder and charm, Orkney is a very small place at the edge of Europe, and even in Rae's time, relatively tamed. I feel I've gained a far better grasp on what shaped him, as well as what drew him away. The chance to test himself in the wider and wilder world, across the rough Atlantic to places not yet marked on anyone's map.
What happened was the ship got iced in. It was a bit unusual, but she didn't manage to get back up to the bay in time. I think maybe more extreme weather conditions than usual. So he was iced in with the ship all winter. And he apparently enjoys the experience so much that he managed to get himself employed at Moose Factory for a long period. So that's really how it came about. I don't think he'd intended to have a career in the Hudson's Bay Company, but just by accident it happened.
Rae celebrated his 21st birthday that autumn and would spend the next 10 years as a doctor and eventually as a chief factor for the Hudson's Bay Company. Like his fellow Orkneymen and Canadian voyageurs, he quickly settled into this new way of life.
You want to taste the water there? Yeah, salty.
Yeah. So it's definitely part of the ocean.
Yeah, Hudson Bay.
Look at that wind.
I know.
I'd like to give myself the task at some point of going for like a long walk, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like something like this, like saying I'm going to walk up, 2 miles. I don't know how practical that is.
Yeah, Repulse Bay will do that for sure.
Yeah, because I just that feeling of being out on the own and his relationship to danger.
Right.
And like for me, that with the idea of wildlife and the weather is it's very terrifying.
Yeah.
So it'd be I'd like to push my boundaries that way.
Can you imagine being out and sailing in that today?
I can't imagine, but
he loved it. He thrived in it, right?
But how I can imagine it is that, there's a town here, but they're in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of the trip they're in places that have never been
inhabited,
mapped, or they don't you look at that map in the book and it's blank to them, and they're these instruments, and I just can't. So just like his boundaries are so much farther out than, mine and anybody I know.
He would have sailed right by here, right straight through here, on his way to Repulse, where we're going tomorrow, right up the bay.
It was 13 years after Rae's arrival at Hudson Bay, when the British Admiralty sent out Franklin in 1845. His two 340-ton ships were manned with 128 crew, reinforced with steel to withstand the ice. The ships were loaded down with all the trappings of Victorian comfort: fine china, heavy silverware, and lots of polish for their brass buttons. A library of 1,200 books, provisions to last for several years, and a steam-powered organ to play the officers' favorite tunes. They were self-sufficient floating hotels, and they were headed into 70,000 square miles of uncharted territory. You are suggesting then that that's maybe what prevented the ships from coming down? At Rankin Inlet, I met our advisor Tagak Curley, an honored statesman whose knowledge of the written record is combined with the oral tradition of his Inuit ancestors.
So what I'm saying is he was a poor planner, I think. He really truly believed that the size of his crew
Ships
will enable him to succeed. No, that was his
arrogance.
Very. He was a lousy navigator. He wasn't suited to navigate the Arctic because he had failed on his first and second expedition, and then the British government hired him again. So
I want to introduce you to Bernadette Dean.
Hi.
She's going to be with us for the whole shoot.
Rick Roberts.
Have you been north before?
Went as far as North Bay, but...
As far as North Bay, it's as far as he's been. You know where North Bay is?
It's very far south.
Just north of Toronto.
South of Toronto?
North of Toronto, not very far north. The British Navy was not alone in its pursuit of a Northwest Passage. There was an intense rivalry with the Hudson's Bay Company, who had been mapping for some 200 years and were anxious to complete their own survey of the Arctic coastline. With Franklin on his way into Arctic waters, the Hudson's Bay Company hatched a plan, with John Rae as leader. For the first time in Arctic exploration, a small party of seasoned voyageurs, in the company of two Inuit interpreters, would overwinter north of the tree line and survive by living off the land. Unlike Franklin's expedition, they would sail small craft north to Repulse Bay, where they would carry on by foot, packing only 4 months' provisions for a journey that might take over 2 years.
I can only try to imagine the degree of Rae's trepidation. I board a well-equipped plane to a place on a map that, though isolated, boasts a thriving community. Still, it's north, it's way north. Way more north than I've ever been. It's the unknown to me and brings some anxiety. Whereas Rae was headed to a place where the white man's map stuttered out into blankness, a place from which news of misfortune could take years to emerge, if at all. I began reading Rae's journal of his first trip to the Arctic.
I could not conceal from myself that many were of the opinion that we ran the risk of starving. Little was known of the resources of that part of the country to which we were bound, and all agreed there was little chance of procuring fuel, unless some seal oil could be obtained from the natives. Yet the novelty of our route and of our intended mode of operations had a strong charm for me, and gave me an excitement which I could not otherwise have felt. The Eskimo were encamped about a quarter of a mile from us, and had a concert every night, a union of the vocal and the instrumental.
performer, being in the center of the tent, keeps turning slowly around whilst 4 or 5 women add their voices, producing among them a horrible discord. Each of the men in his town takes up the drum and thumps away until he is tired, and another takes his place, until it has passed through the hands of all the males of the party.
Inuit going around that way. Come do that.
That evening, I got a real surprise. They were doing the same kind of dance that Rae would have done back in Orkney.
Some people call this the barren land. I figured those people who call it barren don't know how to live off this land.
Well, that's the guys who brought all
And
their
it's
tin
not
food.
barren.
Yeah. Well, I think that was the strategy of John Rae, was to pack light, trust to his instincts, and I think to the survival things he learned from the Inuit, or from, I guess, on his own. I guess he figured out the cranberries on his own.
King Mingna, it already has a name, so it wasn't discovered by what's his face.
What's the Inuit name for them?
King Mingna.
King Mingna?
Yeah. They were my mom's favorite berries.
I'm afraid of stepping on some.
Pardon?
There's the blood. See, if I saw that, I would think that was an animal had died there.
Really?
Yeah.
With no animal tracks?
Charlton Island Woods, spring 1835. Rae is snowshoeing over thin snow when he notices what looks like blood on the webbing. He retraces his steps, finding he's squished old cranberries under the snow. Charlton Island Camp, spring 1835. With the men lined up before him, Rae doles out cranberries like medicine.
This stuff right here?
Yeah.
Oh, right on. So I'm gonna get some of this. This will make a. This is for tea, right?
Yeah.
You know, this moss under here.
Tirauja.
The what?
Tirauja.
And this is a. This is not. You can't eat this.
No, I don't.
Okay, I won't either. Well, that's a fuel?
Oh, you can use it to start a fire.
All right.
You want to see what it smells like?
Yep. It smells good. It's good because my berry picking
hands.
This is the same moss as this stuff?
Different color, yeah. My friend Dorothy and I set the land on fire once.
What happened?
We started cooking,
right.
Making tea while we were berry picking when we were kids.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we notice there's fire. Your
Right,
socks on first.
Socks on first, right. Awesome. Okay. No. This. Yeah, pop it up.
There.
And I got this in here. Excellent. I can become the animal. This is beautiful. This is
become a
beautiful.
what?
Thank you. Like the animal. Like you, I'm covered in. I have more caribou fur than a caribou does. Is this all from one animal?
Two.
Two animals.
Yeah.
How does it look?
You look nice. Does it fit you? Is it comfortable?
It fits extremely well. It feels like. I mean, the whole thing, the idea of skin, it makes you more mobile.
With no word of the expedition in 2 years, Lady Franklin began to question the Admiralty.
It's nearing 2 years since they left, and no word in a year and a half.
Suited for 3.
But is it not standard for messages to be left along the way, in cairns, in any of those several hundred copper message cylinders, or passed on to whalers?
Suited for 3, as I said, but with the resources to ride through 5.
And cut.
Rae's journal entry, June 1846. After receiving a salute of 7 guns and 3 hearty cheers, we set sail north on Hudson Bay with a light air of fair wind. We had on board 25 bags of flour, each 100 weight, 20 bags pemmican, 2 bags grease with a good stock of tea, sugar, and chocolate. Considering that we were to be absent 15 or perhaps 27 months, our quantity of provisions was not very great. It was here, at the mouth of the North Pole River, that Rae and his crew continued on foot into unknown territory. And eventually they had to make a decision: stay the winter or return to Hudson Bay.
And then we tie these to the rocks?
Rae gathered his men together, and they all agreed to overwinter, knowing full well that they might starve to death. I can't imagine spending a winter in almost total darkness. All hands were now busily employed making preparations for a long and dreary winter. For this purpose, 4 men were set to work to collect stones for building a house.
Imagine having to make that decision, though, eh? Spending the winter here
I can't imagine.
in a stone house and knowing that you could starve, eh?
Yeah, and probably the panic of getting enough food, and of course, heat. It's a lot bigger than I thought.
Bigger?
Yeah. And the rocks are huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
I imagine something really tiny and...
Oh, really, eh?
Now, look at that. The walls are like, what are they, 2 feet thick?
I know, yeah.
Look at the threshold.
Do you think they laid that down there?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And look at like the size of that rock. They probably have to go find it up there and bring it.
The Inuit had good relationships with the group of men here because those group of men were really good to the Inuit. He heard that they would take a dog team and look for proper rocks, and when they would pile up the rocks on a dog team and bring them here and to use to build this house.
One of the stories in the narrative, they built this house in September, finished it around October.
Right, yeah, it took a month.
Yeah. Then, they were freezing in here. And then he went and visited a snow hut, as they call it, Igloo, and it was warm as toast. And he's saying, what the heck am I doing up back in the stone house? Well, imagine the work. It took him a month. Then he was building snow huts, igloos.
Yeah.
He would be set up in camp. He'd be on the move, set up an igloo, and tea hot in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I visited a snow hut and it was so warm that my waistcoat, which had been frozen stiff for some time past, actually thawed. Ulubak informed me that even in winter, they strip off all their clothes before going to bed.
We need about 40 blocks to get an igloo built and ready. My technique is that I cut my blocks with a bit of a curve. Huh? That isn't the way I do it, Now I'm going to tell you something.
Okay.
So which one is this leading to?
It's going off this way.
Is it going to be easier to take it out when it's wedged like that?
No.
Or straight?
Straight.
You see my block, the exact same all the way down?
Yeah.
For two guys this size, he used to make it in half an hour. Would you believe that?
No. Okay, there we go.
Una ko may garag man kami man kay pa. Tinulog pa ako nung umaga.
I'm in awe as I watch Tagak and realize that he has the ability to survive in this environment, just like his ancestors who were guides to John Rae. There is a continuity of time and place that is almost unimaginable to me. 1st of January was as beautiful a day as we could have wished to begin the new year. There was a light air of wind and the temperature was -26. Our dinner consisted of hare and reindeer tongue, with a currant pudding as second course. A small supply of brandy was served out, and on the whole I do not believe a more happy company could have been found.
Surrounded by 60 healthy men, 2 immensely sturdy ships, the stores on board can hold 5 years.
Most certainly.
Sir George, you sailed the Terror before. Have you a view on the fortunes of Franklin?
Those ships would not have been my choice.
Nonsense. They're more than up to the task. Even after you stove in the Terrace hull of Labrador.
That was ice, sir, not negligence.
I managed to lead her halfway round the world, and through ice.
Any elder Eskimo has dwarfed our feats. Some sturdy seal-hunting matriarch is currently eclipsing all of our great missions with every fresh stroke of her kayak paddle.
And I wish you'd have drawn me a bloody map.
Gentlemen, as to Franklin's ships, Sir George?
Especially with a reinforcement, they're too bulky, too deep a draught. That Hudson Bay fellow, Dr. Rae, has reportedly been making as much headway as any. Some of it by York boat, much of it on foot.
Having surveyed 655 miles of uncharted coastline on his first Arctic journey and overwintered his party successfully, all in good health, Rae was informed that the British Admiralty wanted him to join a mission. After 3 years, they finally admitted that Franklin and his crew were lost. They were sending out several expeditions. From the east, Captain James Clark Ross would command 2 ships through Lancaster Sound. From the west, Rae was to join Sir John Richardson overland and down the mighty Mackenzie River to the Arctic coastline, then east to the Coppermine River. They completed the 3,600-mile journey in record time, but no evidence was found of the lost voyage. Richardson and Captain Ross returned to England.
Parlor, October 1849. Richardson and J.C. Ross sit in chairs waiting, both looking uncomfortable. The door swings open and Jane enters, haggard, unsteady.
My ladyship.
Forgive me for not more gracefully absorbing the shock of your early returns.
Have you been briefed on...
Yes, you're... Perhaps there is another word for failure that does not besmirch the efforts of those who do not achieve their aim, but it certainly escapes me.
Disappointment.
A virulent version of that might do.
I beg your patience. I traveled with your husband, Jane, for several years. I am far from ready to parade him as a dead hero. Only a fine, reliable man. We searched the northern coast. West, all the way to the Coppermine River, we cached supplies.
I'm certain you did all that an honest man could do.
And Dr. Rae will continue in the spring with his search.
Whereas, coming from the east, we just met ice.
You met ice. Ice in the Arctic, of all things.
I didn't mean that in any way facetiously.
Bodies were found, I understand.
3, yes. Above Barrow Strait, in the expedition's first encampment. Were properly buried. Such things are...
Is he capable? Oh, Dr. Rae, finding my husband.
He is perhaps the most capable man in the world of achieving this task. He has been known to snowshoe hundreds of miles to tend to a sickly native.
I no longer trust the Royal Navy. 3 years of utter uselessness.
Rae continued searching for Franklin further east along the coastline, traveling light with a small crew, living off the land.
Tama. Time.
King Udle?
Ila, onaro atau tiku.
King Udle.
Yeah. Nice caribou.
Very warm.
Still wet from swimming.
Right.
One of the Eskimos speared a seal on the ice near the edge of the open water. Their mode of approaching the seal requires much patience, as the hunter must lie flat in his face and advance towards the seal by a series of motions resembling those of the animal. An onlooker would find much difficulty in telling which was the seal.
Try some seal meat.
Okay.
It'll warm you up.
Okay.
Not very good. Good. Try some liver.
It's very tender. That's liver?
Mm-hmm. They'll warm you up after you have eaten it. They're the best meat.
The liver?
That's the seal meat.
Oh, any part of the seal?
Any part of the seal.
Okay.
Liver, meat, warms you up.
With Rae continuing his search into uncharted territory, he received letters of encouragement from London. Sir Francis Beaufort, the Admiralty's chief mapmaker, wrote,
I cannot let the mail go without telling you how intensely fixed all eyes are upon you. Let me then, my dear doctor, add my voice to the moans of the wives and children of the two unfortunate ships, and implore you to save neither money nor labor in fulfilling your holy mission. 2 ships will sail in 10 days for Bering Strait, others in spring for Baffin Bay. But to you I look for the solution of our melancholy suspense.
Well aware of the anxiety of a nation fixated on the lost voyage, Rae notes in his journal,
I hope, if moderately fortunate, by surveying some degrees of latitude of the shores along which we pass, to solve the question of a northwest passage. I think it will yet fall to the Hudson's Bay Company to accomplish this long attempted undertaking. January was the coldest month. The temperature fell to 72 below zero. But our journey hitherto had been the most fatiguing I had ever experienced. The severe exercise with a limited allowance of food had much reduced the whole party, yet we were all in excellent health. And although we lost flesh, we kept up our spirits and marched merrily on, tightening our belts. Mine came in 6 inches.
With Rae continuing north in search of the lost expedition, Lady Jane Franklin wrote to him that she had convinced Parliament to approve a £20,000 reward the equivalent of £1 million today, and she intended to press the Admiralty to raise it to £50,000. She wrote,
Not only to find them living, but to find any memorials of them, or obtaining any certain intelligence of their fate.
After 6 years without a word, Lady Franklin was increasingly desperate for results. Not only did she write to the Russian Tsar and the American president, she slipped into the fashion of the day and consulted a clairvoyant. Her rational mind stood its ground, however, until an Irish sea captain by the name of William Coppin knocked on her door.
The youngest of my daughters, my 4-year-old, Wheezy, left us from fever this winter last.
I'm sorry for you, Captain Coppin.
But I seek no sympathy in this. I have 4 other children, whom, in the night, Wheezy appears to visit.
A ghost, you meaning?
My dead daughter's spirit would seem to visit them.
Have you witnessed this yourself? But you trust your children?
It was the specifics that turned me.
Please.
They describe her coming in a kind of blue...
light?
For want of a better term. My eldest daughter asked Wheezy about the lost explorers.
Why would she?
It's on everyone's tongues. The children hold that the room appeared to fill with ice. Some channels are seen, some ships. One of them is in a bad state. Not sunk, but listing. Upon asking Wheezy where this place exists, the vision dissolved, to be replaced by a series of letters on the wall. They spelled out in a fashion, Erebus and Terror, Sir John Franklin, Lancaster Sound, Victoria Channel, Point Victory.
As to these letters, with what manner of instrument? Pen, pencil?
Nothing so solid.
I'm afraid this is just a point on a map.
But what of the location?
It would be on the path of his operations. Do you believe in ghosts, sir?
Over 30 years on the sea, you see some things that beggar explanation, but no. I had no position on this subject. Not until these last few months. I believe that that is where those poor sailors bide.
Wollaston, as we find, is not its own island.
Rae returned to Admiralty House in London with an additional 800 miles of newly charted coastline. He had indeed come very close to Victory Point on King William Land.
And you did this again on foot?
Much of it. This strait here is no friend to a smallish boat.
Lady Franklin. Gentlemen.
Dr. Rae. Do you know Dr. Rae of the Coppin prediction?
I've heard mention.
Do you give it any credence?
The vision or...
The likelihood of Sir John and his men being found off Victory Point. Now, I understand it comes from the blue light of a dead girl. I understand anyone can see amorphous shapes on the wall. But that place does exist on a map. It is not conjured from a dream.
Well, it bears investigation.
How many ships must I send out? And yet you, travelling almost alone, return with actual evidence.
That is still speculation.
Well, it is it not? A piece of a flagstaff from an English ship found to the west of King William Land.
It is, yes.
And you will be returning there.
Yes, in a matter of months.
Is there any chance of you doing what no one else?
I will be nearer there than most.
It would mean a great deal to me.
On his return to the north, Rae paid little heed to the Copland prediction, but in fact, he was headed in the very direction of King William Land. By chance, he met with a small band of Inuit who had some relics from Franklin's ship: forks, spoons, a broken compass, and eyewitness accounts of the fate of the long-lost expedition. The ships had indeed been stuck in the ice off Victory Point. Sir John had died the second winter. The crew had taken to the land, hauling 2-ton lifeboats, filled with all manner of gear: furniture, books, brass polish. They had perished as they hauled south on King William Land and had resorted to the last desperate attempt of survival: cannibalism. Rae was stunned. When more Inuit arrived with the same story and more relics, he knew it was the truth. As he looked out across the strait, he had a decision to make: return to England immediately with the news, or travel to the site and risk another season in the north. His trusted interpreter, William Oulibuck, was afraid to continue. The spirits of the dead and the dark forces of shamanism might be at play over there.
Doctor, welcome.
Thank you, Your Lordship.
I believe you know all the members of the council.
Gentlemen. To wish the circumstances...
Did you bring us pemmican, Doctor?
My oversight, sir.
Oh.
We've read your report. Grim stuff.
Well, I believe there's no way around that, Sir Francis.
I'll take the truth most days, if that's it.
The report is the most thorough picture I can present based on the fact that I am dealing with testimony as opposed to my own observation of what transpired.
I'd only suggest there may be some open water between the news and rumour.
Like these testimonies from Pelly Bay?
From that region, yes, natives from whom Admiral Perry himself took some direction.
It's a different thing, Doctor, if your witnesses are telling you where to find whales or where the river finds the open sea. The issue here is Eskimo tales of Englishmen eating Englishmen. A number of us here have spent years in the ice on dwindling supplies, and yet the very thought...
Well, I could only assume that the thought arrives far along the way, at the stage of final desperation.
But they would not lead you there, to the camps.
There was some vagueness as to the locations, and reluctance in accompanying us, yes.
Personally, I see no grounds for doubt. But do you have any doubts as to their fate?
Not so much doubt as bedevilment. The Eskimo claim that the men came as a group, several dozen along the shore, walking, hauling their sledges loaded with all manner of obsolescence, but also howling, muttering, disoriented. Several dozen men, similarly disoriented.
How is that strange? They're starving, are they not? They're suffering all the damage of exposure.
Oh, men don't starve at the same speed. Nor do they freeze, nor go mad.
Suggesting something afflicted them.
That would be speculation, which is something that, as you can see, I did not venture in the report.
You ventured plenty, Doctor.
I was not able to bring back any bones, but I suspect that would be something more akin to a horror show.
I believe that ship has sailed.
This claim you make of a stream running down from Boothia to King William Island?
The chart suggests a bay, but the ice was too young. There's current. It must clear in the summer. It's there. I submit. That is the passage.
Whereas the path Franklin took through Victoria Strait
meets a permanent barricade. They were forced ashore, or so it would seem, on the most inhospitable of lands.
Come in. Come in.
Lady Franklin,
Dr. Rae,
I hope this is not an inopportune time.
it is no worse than any other time. I've read your report as it appeared in the Times. Have you something otherwise to offer?
Only my apology that such a document was allowed to.
Please, not the passive voice. Someone allowed it. Someone wrote it. Someone found it judicious to publish in all its odious malignancy.
I did write it. But what you read was intended solely for my employer and the Admiralty. I submitted a more sensitive document to the Times, and they opted instead for the sensational. I can only hope that now, with knowing...
What do I know, Dr. Rae? What am I meant to take from your outrageous speculations?
In no way was my report meant to be inflammatory.
Yet, that is precisely its effect. Besmirching the characters of
No
men.
time did I even allude to the elements of character.
Now, might you indulge me to finish? I have travelled far greater distances into many more countries than your Hudson Bay Company ilk. And I do not pretend to know the peculiarities of the Arctic region, but I do pretend to some knowledge of men, of British men, at any rate, in many conditions, in many places. Your accusations of cannibalism, or you twinge at the term accusation, what would suit you better? Suggestion, inference. I await your response.
Beyond the physical articles, which I understand you yourself have observed, the verbal testimony of witnesses.
They're Eskimos.
Yes, they were Eskimo, the witnesses.
These men known to you?
Not these men in particular, no.
Yet you readily vouch for their characters. Did you consider the possibility that if cannibalism did occur, it was the gruesome handiwork of these very savages, as opposed to Christian officers of the British Royal Navy?
Cannibalism does occur amongst the northern natives, as it has amongst all races, throughout all times, under very specific conditions. But amongst the Eskimo, if one were to commit such an act, he would be shunned. He would not be protected or accommodated, and I know of no incidents where a group of natives have indulged in such activities. More than once, the Inuit have saved British sailors.
Oh, sorry. Inuit?
It's how they name themselves. The Inuit, it means the people.
What does that make us to them?
Fellow humans.
Whatever grains of truth reside in your morbidly flamboyant presentation of events, I'm stunned that you could submit such a report knowing fully the pain it would cause so many.
I admit, I was not thinking of the pain of others when I wrote down what I still take to be the truth.
And that, in and of itself, speaks rather sadly to your character.
I see that my visit has been premature. I deeply regret.
Yes, I have no doubt you will have regrets. Many and deep, and of your own making.
It is Tagak. Hello, John. You made it.
I made it.
See, nice car they brought
in
you.
One piece.
In one piece,
yes.
all the way from Rankin Inlet.
Yes.
That's the Nelson, you know. National Portrait Gallery is just around the corner. This is the National Gallery here. Canada House.
That's our house. Eh?
Canada House, yeah.
You got it.
Lady Franklin tried to get a Sir John Franklin.
Right in the center here?
Right in the center here.
I'm glad she was overruled.
But she did get one just down the road here, Waterloo Place, just down there. So we'll go down there and have a look. Okay?
Okay. So this is where she took. Amazing. This is.
So that was a clip. So that's. There he is. That's Franklin.
Oh, this is the one that she at the House of Commons approved the whole sponsorship of it, eh?
Yeah. Look, right here.
To the great Arctic navigator and his brave companions who sacrificed their lives in completing the discovery of the Northwest Passage after death 1847 and 8. Now, who would believe that he discovered the Northwest Passage in England?
Everybody did.
You know, that's not true, eh? Because a dead man cannot find something. It just could not happen. So I'm absolutely amazed. Incredible. So this is John, eh?
They were burying Franklin here. So that's his grave in the north. That's what that depicts.
But that may not be true either, eh?
What?
Because he may have been left behind.
Left behind, do you think?
In the ship.
They didn't bury him on the shore.
They did not bury him on. If they did bury him on the shore, they would have had some prominent sites, location cairns, and proper dignified rocks assembled.
Look at this with a bow and arrow.
They did not have any native people on that expedition. That's why they failed. There was a not only fatal mistake, they did not have any advisors of Inuit. You know, we could have helped them a lot.
This is the place,
Where the action.
This is the center of the empire, yeah.
Katima bera una taktuksen. Katima bera go una taktuksen the British Empire. My, it's good.
Yeah. This is 600 years old. 600 years old. It's been here. Yeah.
So this is where the compass more like?
Well, it's a weather direction of weather. So it's a weather vane is on the roof.
Mm-hmm. It still works?
It still works. Southwest wind.
Yeah, amazing.
And this is where the Arctic Council met for all the decisions about
all the polar exploration stuff.
All here.
Reports coming in.
Yeah. This is the room that John Rae walked into with his report. Up those stairs that we came up.
And the uproar happened after that. Amazing.
There's Ken. I'd like you to meet Tagak Curley, Ken McGugan.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Honored to meet you, though.
Likewise.
Welcome.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here. Look at this room.
This is
something else, eh?
Fantastic. I mean, this was like the Pentagon of the day.
It was, eh?
Yeah, well, the British had the largest navy in the world, and that's how they ruled it. They ruled the waves, and this is the place. You know, they ran it from here.
I guess it's here.
No, right on.
We had spent time with our advisors from the Arctic and Orkney, and with Canadian Ken McGugan, author of a book on Rae. In London, we were seeking a Navy perspective from Ernest Coleman, an historian and retired naval officer.
We had a navy that was certainly the biggest navy in the world, I think the best navy in the world. It had beaten the French, and there was a role for them in this to try and find this Northwest Passage.
Did John Franklin, in your view, forge the last link of the Northwest Passage?
Oh, unquestionably. Remember, it was that from north to south, that gap. He came down. Now, we know that he'd sent parties ahead. We know that coast down King William Island had already been charted. To do that, you had to link up to the bottom, to the Simpson Strait, that area there. So, yes, he did. He discovered and forged the last link with their lives.
But there are no evidence that they have found that passage. You know, they have not recorded it.
Maybe because they were dead.
Absolutely no factual statement that his officers confirmed that fact.
But okay, the real point is, discovery implies going back and telling someone where something might be. That's number one. Secondly, this marching across the ice. The original objective was to find the navigable Northwest Passage. You march across the ice, you haven't achieved a Northwest Passage, all you've done is walk across the ice. So there was no passage through there at that time ever, because the ice was always coming down. There was no navigable passage there. So they discovered no passage, there was none to be found in that quarter. The only conceivable way is down through Rae Strait. Rae was the one who found Rae Strait, and he brought that back.
People think of Rae dressed up in his native skins, going wild, as the thing that the criticism of going native. He was using technology as well. He would use the inflatable boats, he would use the native dress, he would use snow houses, because as he built a stone one and it was freezing, so you use what is going to keep you alive. His one problem probably was he was a guy that thought that everybody was interested in just hearing the truth rather than what they were actually wanting to hear.
It's interesting you said there's evidence of cannibalism. In fact, there's not a shred of evidence of cannibalism. Such people as Charles Dickens looked into it and studied every tiny example of possible cannibalism that had happened throughout the Navy's history, and in fact there wasn't. And then modern means of looking at these bones that have been found, they have cut marks. Well, it shows a weakness in some people's thinking, if that's the only way they can assume that cut marks come on bones is by cannibalism. In fact, there's 400 cut marks on the bones that they found. The vast majority were on the hands, on the fingers. Now, you don't have to be in the police to realise that's probably someone defending themselves. And if you compare those cut marks with other cut marks unrelated that we definitely know are not cannibal, and I did this in York, because there's a battlefield there, a medieval battlefield, the marks on the bones are identical. I believe that Franklin's people were attacked by the natives, and not only that they were mutilated afterwards, the bodies were mutilated. This business of breaking long bones to get at the marrow, all these sort of stories, none of them actually prove cannibalism. What they do prove and point directly towards an attack by the natives. And in a sense, who can blame them? 105 men coming down King William Island, a great threat to these people who are living on the edge of survival as it is. So there's no evidence actually of cannibalism. There's plenty of evidence that they're attacked.
Surely, if I may address the Admiralty and the English public, I think it's shameful, arrogant to label people that you don't know as conspirators who murdered and conspired to take advantage of the weak people. I think that's a very strong accusation. And I really, truly believe you don't have any evidence with what you're relying upon. You're relying on second-hand information or third or fourth-hand information. You don't. Charles Dickens didn't have any fact. He'd never been up to that part of the area. And yet he indicted the Inuit race. He created an animosity to people that were innocently standing by, waiting to help people that might be dying. Because Franklin's people, in fact, were scattered all over 80 or 100-mile range. They were not in 105 band. So for you to accuse my people, someone really ought to apologize. I'll be the first to apologize for making such a innocent information that we didn't think would have created an uproar.
Well, Tagak, I don't think you need to apologize for anything. Rae had been up there and brought home, collected all these detailed stories that cannot be made up by a bunch of people. When he's interviewing someone in a tent, person after person, telling the same story, it's in such vivid detail that in itself is overwhelming. And then you get to the forensic evidence collected by Margaret Bertulli and Anne Keenlyside, two Canadian scientists who have done detailed forensic studies. The evidence is completely and utterly overwhelming to anyone who has the least bit of an open mind.
I'm afraid repeating the old story time and time again will not make it any better. The evidence does not exist, and if you look at the evidence, it points to something totally and utterly different. And I've come across time and again people with this mindset, they will not change, will not look at it. I mean, when you carve a turkey at home, do you leave cut marks? I've talked to butchers and said, do you leave cut marks? They don't leave cut marks. The only way you get cut marks, particularly horizontal on the bones, is through an attack.
I will not accept, and you must apologize for accusing our people of slaughter, of massacre. That's unfounded, that's labeling us as murderers. If there was such a thing happen, we would have known about it. Our history, our oral history. We don't need a written record to have evidence of what had happened. What you're telling me is you're just trying to protect Lady Franklin, John Franklin. A dead man, for instance, cannot find a Northwest Passage, only in England. Come on.
You would not say I'm making too much of this?
Heavens, no. In my ignorance of the details, I cannot speak to the intentions at work, but the result is akin to defamation.
John, so generous of you to find the time. Dr. John Richardson, Mr. Charles Dickens.
So pleased to make your acquaintance, Doctor.
As I am yours.
I've been making my case to Lady Franklin that I'm rather strong on both voyages and cannibalism, though this may not be apparent in my work to date.
I'm sorry, sir. Strong on cannibalism? What does that mean?
It's been an interest of mine since childhood.
I'm sorry, Your Ladyship. I fail to grasp the function of my advice.
Mr. Dickens is here on my invitation, but you know his work. He's a prominent novelist.
A novelist? Are you writing a book?
I was under the impression I might be of some benefit.
He's composing an article for the magazine Household Words. Mr. Dickens is internationally known.
As a writer.
As a writer.
His arguments are renowned for their insight and persuasiveness. My husband was your dear friend, John. I'm struggling with the soiling of his name and of the brave souls who served with him.
I must admit, I am reluctant to be persuaded that a writer of fiction would most serve you now. I mean in no way to belittle your stature, sir, but our friend Sir John is enshrouded in a story of monstrous proportions. And what is fact and what is fiction is, up to this point, for God alone to know.
Pardon me, but my glimpse of the report alerted me to several puzzling assumptions, each of which I doubt would stand much deft scrutiny. As you work with a scalpel, sir, I work with words. This Dr. Rae has a wondrous naivete. Not the sort of thing one sees in London very much anymore, where a person believes everything he is told.
Not only is Dr. Rae no fool, he is an exceedingly decent, competent, and clear-headed man. There'd be no gain in assailing his character, for anyone who actually knows him will come immediately to his defense.
As you do now. Then what is one to make of his assertions?
I believe his assertions are what was reported to him, nothing more.
And yet his indiscretion at making them public.
That was not his doing.
You hold Rae blameless.
I think it would serve you to hold him so.
More tea, Mr. Dickens.
So, writing novels. Is there a living to be had in that?
A precarious one.
Perhaps I'll stay with medicine then.
There were little Staffordshire figurines being made of John Franklin and Lady Franklin. So when Dickens was invited by Lady Franklin, well, this is somebody that you go to. Even though Dickens was an extraordinary figure already, he would have been thrilled to go to meet Lady Franklin and anxious to please her in any way. So that was the way that, when she summoned him, he was there the next day.
Was he a social climber? Would it have been in any way to his advantage to have sort of befriended Lady Jane Franklin?
I think that's a possibility. I think that probably somebody could answer this. We have someone here who could probably answer that question. You introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Gerald, Gerald Dickens. I'm a great-grandson to Charles Dickens. So if I can, if I can fill in any gaps.
Yeah. Now, when we first met, you hadn't really heard of this aspect of...
No, I hadn't at all.
Did it surprise you?
It did, immensely. Almost because with his background, I can see him siding with Rae more than Franklin. And that's what surprises me about it.
A very British attitude here, that no British man, no British Christian man would ever do that sort of thing. That natives would, because they're not British. They're not Christian. That empire attitude.
I think he actually uses those words, doesn't he? That no English Christian man would do such a thing.
I genuinely believed it.
Yeah, I think so.
So he's reflecting the very popular and widely held attitude.
Definitely.
In Britain. At
Absolutely,
that time,
definitely. I mean, he saw himself very much as a mouthpiece, as a champion for whatever the prevailing attitude was.
But if you can get Charles Dickens to do your PR, I mean,
Exactly.
And then he's going to sell more household words, supporting her point of view.
Oh, he never lost sight of the
Rae's
business
point.
aspect.
The word of a savage is not to be taken. Firstly, because he is a liar. Secondly, because he is a boaster. Thirdly, because he often talks figuratively. Fourthly, because he is given to a superstitious notion that when he tells you he has his enemy in his stomach, you will logically give him credit for having his enemy's valor in his heart.
He's no ethnographer, to be sure.
Oh, there's more.
I have little doubt.
We believe every savage to be in his heart covetous, treacherous, cruel, a man. Man is an idiot.
And a master of fictions.
What do you make of my evidence?
Knowing John Franklin, I'd be much surprised if he gave up his teacup while he still breathed.
I mean the issue of cannibalism.
We all know it is a rare and horrendous but verifiable fact of the art.
Yes, and that is the issue. The British will readily embrace a horrendous fact of natives murdering and eating British men, but they will not even begin to attempt to fathom British eating British. You had a cannibal on your first journey.
A Voyage, not one.
Mixed blood. Iroquois French, was he not? So what great element of British character makes us impervious?
Even amongst our seamen, it is looked upon with the utmost revulsion.
Not arguing predisposition, John. None of us will be predisposed towards it.
We few British who have traversed the Arctic know that there are things for which nothing here can prepare us. There have been several occasions when I have doubted my vision. There have been 1 or 2 occasions when I have doubted my mind. Some, I suspect, even British, have found themselves no more themselves. Now, I can't speak for 130 men, but I knew John Franklin as well as men can be known. And I would swear on my Bible that he would have sooner eaten a bullet than a morsel of human flesh.
The report, it made no specific reference to Franklin.
Your report asserted that the few remaining men, all British with families here, consumed their fellows. Now, you cannot be so naive as to think you would not cause a storm bringing back such news, especially on the word of another.
Yes, but if that word of another had been British, would I then have been believed?
You know that by many you are. If you had visited the site, given your expertise as a doctor.
The choice was made.
It was, and you made it. I gather you found it unfeasible to travel to the site.
And why do I sense that you know the answer to that question?
How important does the shamanism role play in this thing? You know, there's been a tragedy. There's been an unparalleled tragedy in the north, and they knew it, everybody knew it. They have seen some of the ships, you know, that are not going to go back to their native countries or whatever. And men are walking around the country. Many of them have died. And it was not a place, in my view, if I was superstitious and they were superstitious at that time, they weren't going to be hanging around out there for a while. So I think these were factors. I think William, as a young man, probably discouraged going back to. I know he was quite afraid.
The greatest insult to a trained British Navy officer would be to have to go to help to a native person, which is absurd. But that, at that time, was the prevalent opinion.
On the question of going native, can I give you my favourite quotation from that time? It says, "The objective of polar exploration is to explore properly, and not to evade the hazards of the game through the vulgar subterfuge of going native." And quite right, too. These were sailors, they were seamen, they were on a ship, and they were going by water.
I think if I had to find one phrase that perfectly summed up the arrogance and pomposity of Victorian Britain, you found it beautifully there. I find that not only incredibly offensive, but just absolutely mind-blowingly ignorant.
But you're talking as a 21st century man. We're dealing with the mid-19th century here.
It doesn't make it the standard view, it doesn't make it right. Rae differed hugely from the Admiralty for the simple fact that he was born and raised in Orkney. His worldview was completely different from people who owed their position to privilege, to wealth, birth.
Tagak, did you have a comment? Yes, I do have a comment. Really important that I introduce myself to you. I'm one of these savages that your grandfather alluded to.
Sorry.
I believe this was a time where this nation had to unite together. It has a national disaster at its hand. Instead, everybody, including Jane, later Franklin, your grandfathers were sold out to destroy the characters of very important people, including my race, who are known worldwide as most innocent people of the whole earth. But that character assassination that your grandfather did, to call us a murderous individuals who would creep upon the weakest of the white people and ambush them. He was sold out to write an article that was cruel and false. And yet no Englishman has ever taken responsibility to say, I'm sorry. This still has an impact on my people, because no person in this living wants to take any sense of ownership to try and establish a reconciliation. I really believe it is important, though. We could have helped you. Instead, you destroyed the inability to work with you. Why do you think that happened?
I have absolutely no idea. And well, it doesn't make any difference to history, but on behalf of my family, I certainly apologize for what Charles wrote, which was astounding in its vindictiveness. And the only thing I can think, because again, it was very out of character. And I just think it's very easy for him in a London study, in a London office, to take a pen and write and make these accusations. It ties in with public opinion. It's an easy way of selling. But to actually understand what effect it was going to have on an entire race and an entire people, I can't think he would have possibly stopped to think about it, because it would have been completely out of character for him to do that. Completely out of what he spent his entire career in England championing the causes of those that were fighting and those that were being downtrodden by the country, by the government, by the ruling classes. So that's why I was so surprised when you first put me onto the Household Words article, and it is just vindictive. He spent all of his life travelling to prisons and factories and schools and hospitals, but he didn't go to the Arctic. So,
something that occurred to me just listening to you is, wouldn't it be that actually Dickens was so strong in his response, really, really coming out strong, because he was aware that that was actually the feeling of the sensitivities of the Victorians at the time. They were just an attack to a nation's sensitivity. You don't eat your friends.
Yeah. In 1857, so a few years later, during the Indian Mutiny, Dickens would advocate not justice or even retribution, but actually genocide. Quote, "I wish I were commander-in-chief in India," he would write. "I should do my utmost to exterminate the race upon whom the stain of the late cruelties rested." So, in other words, there was another...
He's getting smaller and smaller.
Steady. All I say is that... I don't know. You know...
You any other countries in there?
I love Dickens. You know, but he had this blind spot, I think, in this one way. He didn't transcend his times.
And I think at the time, we hadn't had the Crimean War, we hadn't had the Great War, we hadn't had we've supped on horrors for hundreds of years now, and it's going on at this moment as we sit around this table.
But at that time, the only people who were capable, as far as a good Englishman was concerned, of doing that sort of thing were savages. And, you know, they were an easy target, and so they were attacked.
Very important. This is a very interesting project. All of you are the cast, as well as John. Again, you're welcome to Nunavut anytime. So any of you ever put your foot up there, Tom, welcome anytime to come up to Nunavut. It's been an honor for me to be here. Earlier, you apologized to me and for my people about what your grandfather had written about. This apology is very important, and I accept it on behalf of my people, for the people of Nunavut. It is more than I asked for when I came here, and I was hoping something eventually would come here. So on behalf of the Inuit people, particularly Netchilik people who were impacted, as well my tribe, Ivy League tribe, who were primarily John Rae's guides. I accept your apology, and I want you to know you are a friend, and you're welcome to come to Nunavut anytime. Thank you.
Isn't history a wonderful thing? How many hundreds of years does it take? I find this whole project, from my personal point of view, absolutely fascinating because just from a family point of view, it paints an entirely different picture of the Charles Dickens that we know from the mainstream history books and the stories. I'm pleased we've managed to meet and talk. That's very special, and I will take you up on your invitation. If you ever want to come to Kent, it's not quite as dramatic.
Great. Yes, thank you very much. That you won't make it. But how's it? The library there.
It's great to see you, and have a safe journey home. Glad we could do it.
Keep that alive.
Yes, absolutely.
Pleasure to meet you. It's a listen to you.
John Rae was laid to rest in his beloved Orkney at St. Magnus Cathedral in 1893. Rae had planned to sail a small schooner through the passage he had found to prove it was the final link in the Northwest Passage. But it was not to be until half a century later when Roald Amundsen would vindicate John Rae by sailing through the strait that now bears his name.
Some of the spirits from Orkney. A little toast to John. Huh? Here's to John. Huh?
To John?
Yeah. Here's to
To the boys?
Yeah.